Hello, everybody. Welcome to Work Besties Who podcast. Stories thrive on connections, and so do we as Work Besties. We are very excited to have author Randee Dawn join us and talk about how strong friendships, like Work Besties, will fuel creativity and why they're central to her upcoming novels. Stay with us to hear how Randee balances wellness with the demands of writing, her tips for building authentic relationships. Trust us, guys, you're going to want to stay around.
Hi, I'm Claude.
And I'm Jess.
We are corporate employees by day, entrepreneurs by night, and work besties for life.
Join us as we explore how work besties lift each other up, laugh through the chaos, and thrive together in every industry. Work Besties! Welcome! We're so excited to have you, Randee. Thank you for being here.
Welcome. You are welcome. Thank you for having me here. I'm very excited to chat with you guys.
Fantastic. Well, we would love it if you could just kick off and give a background on who you are.
I'm based in Brooklyn, and I'm an entertainment journalist. I write for outlets like Variety and the LA Times, the Today Show website, those kind of places. I've been doing that for a lot of years. But in my not so secret life, I am also an author. I have always wanted to be an author and a published author. And I have a book out. I have a couple more books coming out, but I tend to write in the speculative fiction arena, which means science fiction, fantasy, a little bit of horror, that kind of stuff. My first book, Tune In Tomorrow, came out in 2022. It's about a reality TV show run by mythical creatures, or mythical creatures, but starring humans, and is deeply punny and silly. And because that worked out well, I completely pivoted. And now I have a more serious book coming out called The Only Song Worth Singing. It's a dark fantasy about rock stars who are bedeviled by fairies, Irish fairies, as they go on their first United States tour in the 1990s. I've been writing this book for so long that I actually started it in the 1990s. So it kind of has that authenticity already baked into it.
Cool. Well, I feel like we'll have a lot of things to relate to.
Yes.
These are one of my favorite times.
Good.
And the 80s too. And the 80s. So you're writing these novels, you pivoted in your newer novels. In these new ones, you're focusing a little bit more on strong friendships. Being that you're on our Work Bestie podcast, we'd love to hear from you. How do you think friendships shapes personal and professional lives?
Having a work bestie, I think, is amazing because you're at work all the time, right? Like it's part of your life. I personally have worked from home for a long time, so my work bestie is like my dog. But when I was still working in offices, having somebody there who you could just rely on, who you could roll your eyes at, if somebody, if that obnoxious guy in advertising wouldn't stop talking, somebody you just have that you can connect with. I am still friends with people who I worked with. So just having that person there, I don't know if I ever liked the phrase work husband or work wife, but work bestie is a really good phrase to have, and I've had a few of those over the years. But in The Only Song Worth Singing, we have three guys who've known each other since they were kids, and you learn about that early. And they grew up outside of Dublin. The whole thing starts out like in 1979, and then we skip all the way to the 90s. So you get a little bit of them as kids and how they met and how they have this sort of musical connection pretty much from the minute one. But they also come from very different parts of society. One of them comes from a more rural background, and the other two are sort of more modern age, middle of the road, middle class kind of guys. And it mirrors a little bit of what was going on in Ireland at the time. I mean, we think of Ireland, of course, as very modern and upscale, and it's become like, the tech capital of Europe and all that kind of stuff. But the first time I went and visited when I was in the 1990s, there was still a lot of sort of the old world butting up against the new world. So I wanted to create characters who reflected that. And at the same time, they all become very tight as friends because they have this music connection between them. And when we fast forward to the 1990s, they're still together. We find out they weren't always together. There were some breaks in there, and we find out about those later on. But they are together. They are touring as a band, and you see them on the road being individuals, but also being in the band, and how they sort of become a totally like another unit, a fourth unit when they are all playing on stage, which is something that reflects when I was doing music journalism and I would watch bands perform and then I would interview people in the bands. They all, of course, had their own individual personalities and hopes and wants and dreams. But then when you would see them together, it was just a different energy, a different vibe, like another person had come in the room. So I wanted to convey that as much as possible when I was creating this friendship between these three people.
And that friendship really started with this love of music, right? Because as you said, they really came from different background, different time, different age. So it's really for you, I would say it's very important. And I think for everybody to have, this friendship is to have something in common, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I don't know about you, but I know how passionate I was, and I am still to some extent. But I was really passionate about music when I was much younger and through my teens. Music is the kind of thing that kind of really got me thinking about long form story writing. I would listen to songs, and story would just kind of weave together in my head. And a lot of the stories that I started writing would come out of this real passion for music. So I know that it can have that effect on people. And I know my friends also reflected that. So the idea that music would bind them feels completely realistic and true to my own personal experience. But also some of my closest friends, we have all these in jokes because of lyrics and bands and things that we liked. And we just have inside jokes that we still use on Facebook together. That wouldn't make any sense if I explained them here. But
Yeah.
I love the fact that you have that, to have that through line. All friends, I think, have some sort of
Yeah.
connection or the backstory that you have that only you two have, you can refer to. You have that shorthand. And having that shorthand just immediately reminds you how important that friendship is. Putting that kind of thing into the book, putting the band into the book, as soon as they sit down and play, they can just, even if they're mad at each other, they can still come out with great music. Sometimes because they're mad at each other, they'll come out with great music. So yeah, that was important to me also to include that.
We've yet to have work besties in a band yet, but you're hitting on a topic that I think is relevant, not just in that industry, but overall for work besties, is the unit operates much stronger together than separately, and or it operates differently, as you commented, right? It doesn't necessarily mean it's better. You could still operate fantastically as an independent artist, but together something magical happens because you're all kind of working in tune together.
Yeah.
So I find that fascinating, and it definitely helps to kind of showcase how support, the kind of the yin and the yang, the elements that you kind of use to help bounce off each other can be really complementary, especially in a band.
Sure. And I just finished reading Keith Richards' autobiography called Life. Keith Richards, the guitarist from the Rolling Stones. It's a huge book. It's like 800 pages.
Wow.
But what's fascinating to read is how early he met Mick Jagger and how early they became, this really tight brotherly kind of friendship that carried into being in the band. And of course, they're still playing. Like they met when they were in their teens and they're like in their 80s now. It's had a lot of ups and downs, and there's been times where they can't stand each other, and Mick is this kind of person and Keith is that kind of person. But it just does my heart good to see people who find their way back to the connections that they had, before they had any idea they were going to be like the biggest rock and roll band of all time kind of thing.
I'm sure they all have that, where they start in like a garage somewhere, just doing it because they love it.
Yep,
and really
exactly.
enjoy each other's company, and then all of a sudden it takes a whole new direction.
One of the things that I really like writing about when possible, I think that there's a lot of societal focus and book focus on female friendship. I like the idea of finding ways to portray male friendship.
Yeah.
Because it is hard for men, especially grown men, to be friends once you get to a certain adult level. It's like my dad was a guy who had no friends. Like it was just his family and his work. And like at the time I didn't understand what that meant exactly, but as an adult myself, it's just so lonely, to go through your adulthood without a real friend. And making a friend as a guy is tough. Sustaining a friendship as a guy is tough, unless it's going to be, let's just watch the game, which is not quite the same as actually sharing hopes and dreams and fears and whatever it is. Whenever possible, if I can write a male friendship, a strong male friendship, I'm not so grandiose as to think people are going to read my book and see them modeling and, oh, I guess I could do that. But I think every little bit counts.
Yeah.
And it's worth showing that there is value in male friendships. I think if more men had more friends, more male friends, we'd have a lot less problems in the world. But I think that men can be very isolated, and don't have the ability to figure out how to have an emotional bond with a guy.
Being in a band would help you get past some of those things because you have to have the hard conversations. Because you do see a lot of males that are friends. There are definitely ones that have great friends too. But and so that having some ways to model that, it's just good to continue to put things like that out there.
But
There's opportunities.
Yeah.
But is it something? Because again, we are so different, right? Women and men are so different. Especially a woman needs their friends, needs that communication, needs to talk. I think male friendship, because they do have, I know, for example, for my husband, right? He has best friends from, I don't know, 20 years ago, like or even 40 now at this point. It's just that it's a different kind of communication.
Mhm.
They don't, like, yes, they are going to watch the game. They are going, I don't know if they need this.
But why can't they? Wouldn't it make more sense to have some of those emotional elements and conversations come out?
I don't know if they are wired like that.
If you go back to one of our previous podcasts where we talk about the origin of human beings, the hunters and the gatherers, both groups separated by gender,
Yeah.
but they both bonded together to help each other.
Yeah.
Right? Like it wasn't like the hunters went solo. They all went together and worked together and communicated together and talked about their issues and feelings that they were having with their wives while the wives were gathering.
Yes.
And having
Oh, yeah.
So they're different. I mean, so what was the difference?
They actually, yes, they are going to complain about us.
But not all of them do. Some of them to Randy's point.
And I mean, we complain about them, right? So, that's totally fair. I think that's fair.
It's my first language.
I think and regardless of it being male versus female, anytime you can put solid examples of long-term friendships and partnerships that accomplish things together, I think is always a good element to put out into the world, right?
I've done articles for the LA Times because I pitched this sort of thing before about best friends in the movies. Because I think when we go to the movies or watch TV show, what ends up happening is the central relationship tends to be a romantic one. It doesn't matter if it's female, female, male, male, or male, female, but like it ends up being like the only significant relationship you apparently can have on TV and movies is romantic. And I'm so happy when I see a movie where characters are just best friends. It's not like there's a romantic angle. They're just there to support one another and give each other whatever it is you need out of a friendship. There's a movie that came out this past season, and it's up for an Oscar called Nickel Boys. And these two young men are sort of forced into like this reformatory 1960s in the South. Because they have each other, they are able to survive. That's how they make it through, because separately it probably wouldn't have happened. And it's so heartening to see an emphasis of the story put on that, because we see so many romantic stories like that. We're never going to run out of those. Those are always going to be there. So I'm so happy when I see something that is focused on friendship. It's not about, oh, this guy dumped me, let me talk to you. There's what is it? You've heard of the Bechdel test, right? Have you heard of that? So there's something called the Bechdel test.
No, I don't.
There's a cartoonist named Alison Bechdel who did books like Fun Home. She used to have a panel cartoon called Dykes to Watch Out For. And in there, one of them brought up this idea of, can a movie pass the Bechdel test, which is a woman talking to a woman for more than like a line or two about a subject that is not about a man. It's harder than you think. And I think that when you have a movie where two characters can talk to one another and it's not about a romantic relationship, I'm there for that.
Yeah. That's so cool. Gina Davis's whole organization she uses that to judge kids movies like Disney and Pixar and all those movies, just to like help showcase how it's ingrained even that young. Like how can they emulate positive, solid friendships and relationships when they're not even seeing it at the age of like 3? That's an interesting dynamic. Okay, so let's get back to your book for a little.
Sure.
I love where we went
Here for that.
I think that's fascinating.
I think it's awesome.
But so in your book, so it is about the friendships itself.
Mm-hmm.
So what is the kind of the goal or the elements that you're trying to get across from having it be focused on this long-term friendship?
So the book itself, like we start off with this friendship, but the actual turning points in the book is the fantastical elements, right? So it's a contemporary fantasy, it's an urban fantasy, which means that while they are on tour, these Irish fairies, sort of show up and descend upon them, and at least one of them like puts his life in danger. He doesn't know it at the time. She is a character who is there's an Irish word for it, but the English translation would be fairy mistress. She's the muse. She inspires great songs, great music, but she sort of steals your life at the same time. And the question is, once you've attracted her attention, how do you get rid of her before she kills you? Because that is what's going to happen. The other two, meanwhile, are dealing with other problems that those have brought along with them. So they're a little distracted from their friend. Their friend kind of gets very enmeshed in what's going on over here. And by the time they realize, hey, we might lose him, then they have to figure out how to fix it. And the big turning point is whether or not their friendship can be enough to get rid of this paranormal, this supernatural sort of vampire kind of character or not. Like, is it going to be enough to save them? So the friendship is very much a foundational element of the book, but it's not necessarily like they're not fighting among themselves exactly, although they do have arguments, but it's not like it's not beaches, right? Like it's not the male equivalent of beaches here.
Okay.
So, but they again, what I really felt was important was to lean heavily on their backstory and how they came together and why they are sort of this unbreakable triad. The stool that only really stands up because it has 3 legs, right? You don't have to have 4 legs. You only need 3 legs to keep a stool aloft.
Yeah.
So the idea that this triad, this trinity, that can weather even supernatural odds.
Kind of chose the 3 because most friendship focuses are usually on 2.
Yeah.
So I think that's interesting to throw a 3rd into the mix as well.
Yeah, and I think they all have their own different relationships to one another, because the 2 boys who were friends before they met the 3rd, the 2 boys who were the middle class ones who met the 3rd, who's much poor, they think that they've always had this sort of like, oh, he's like a little brother, we got to look after him kind of thing. But they come to appreciate his differences and the reason why he's with them and all that throughout the book. Then you see how the 2 middle class kids sort of really interact with one another. It's a bit like a Lennon-McCartney sort of competition. Oh, I could do this all by myself if I had to. And it's like, well, you can do that, but I'm just going to be over here at my piano. So hopefully I've drawn different, not just individual characters, but also individual separate bonds between each pairing.
And we also always like these 3 core friends. It's really like you get something a bit different from each of them because according to their personality. I think having 3 friends also, a lot of time we do say, 3, there's always one that is left. But actually, as you get, maybe when you're young, but when you're older, actually, you really, that doesn't work anymore. We are all together.
Yeah. I mean, I'm very close with several friends who I've known since like junior high or high school. And there's at least, there's like 3 of them, one of whom sort of participates with us and sometimes the other one who doesn't. But like, for the most part, there's at least 3 of us at any given time.
Yeah.
And 2 of them still live in my former home state. Well, 3 of them still live in my former home state of Maryland, but at least 2 of them get together and do their own independent things. And I have to remind myself that it's like, no, the FOMO you're feeling right now, the fear of missing out, is not legitimate. Just be happy that they have made friends like they would not have been friends if I hadn't been there. But they have become friends because they're very close to one another, and I see them responding to each other on group chats and everything. And I'm partially happy, but partially I'm just like, but I want to be there too.
It's so funny because actually with my friends, we are 3. I'm the one that was added.
Oh. That's
the 3rd one.
So I have my friends from grade school. There are 3 of us as well. Usually the other two, similar to what you're talking about, they live in the same hometown, so they hang out all the time. And I apparently, when we were young, there was a time where they didn't invite me to something, and so I like made a big stink about it and was like, "Oh, you mean the time you didn't invite me?" So to this day, I'm not going to say how many years later it is now. To this day, anytime we chat with them and they're like, "Oh, was that the one we didn't invite you to?" Never going to live this down. It's going to be like, "Oh, I'm like right there."
But the nice thing is, like, on the one hand, if you're close enough to them, you probably understand that is both sort of a slight jab, but also a kind of like, we love you enough that we want you to feel not excluded, right?
Oh,
Like
sure.
it's two things at once.
That is true. Friend can, especially a long-term friend, get away with so much because you know it actually is love that's behind it.
Of course.
But it's also a little.
But they didn't invite you.
But
Right.
So, Randee, I think it's fascinating that you've now shifted to writing some books about relationships, and you mentioned that you have other ones coming out. Why? What is the element that's causing you to write so much about friendships?
Well, I think the thing is, it's important to partition two of the books that I have coming out this year with the one that just came out. Like, it's a weird book ending thing. So the two books that are first coming out this year, The Only Song Worth Singing, and then in August, which is again, has another friendship at its core, is a book called Leave No Trace. Both of those are serious books. They're both very involved with Gaelic and Celtic, Irish, Scottish fairies and mythical characters. And they're standalone books, but there is a small connective tissue. And if I write a third book, like, it'll all make sense how it all comes together. But those are different books than the Tune in Tomorrow book, and then the book that will come out in the fall, which is also connected to the Tune in Tomorrow book, which is another silly, funny pop culture book. So, like, those two books are separate from the ones in the middle. And the ones in the middle, Leave No Trace and The Only Song Worth Singing, are books that I wrote a long time ago, before Tune in Tomorrow, before the other book that's coming out. So I almost think of those as my first early books. There's a version of Leave No Trace that I started writing in middle school. Like, I mean, there's a kernel of a character in there who's still in this one. I was fascinated with this idea of a girl who grew up in the woods and, like, she had to, like, survive, what that would be like. And that's a character that's still in Leave No Trace. And I wrote a version of that book in middle school, and I would hand chapters out to my friends, and they would read chapters and give them back to me. And then we'd go home and I'd, like, read a chapter to them on the phone and everything. So, like, that was very much tied up with my own friends. And in that book, Leave No Trace, there's a male-female friendship in there, but one is a foster of a family. So, like, they're not related, but they've become best friends over the years. And he's a singer. He's like a Justin Bieber-esque kind of singer. And she's his songwriter. So they don't have a romantic relationship, but they have this tight sort of sisterly, brotherly friendship bond kind of. And that's the friendship I wanted to put into there. And then they meet this girl who's in the woods, who's friends with a mythical character called the Ghillie Dhu, who's like the man of the forest. And so there's this interesting connection, like, can we be friends with her, or is she dangerous to us? So there's a lot of that going. And then for The Only Song Worth Singing, I started writing a version of that when I was in college. So it's possible that I started writing these really tight friendships because that was something I was much more familiar with. That's what I responded to. That was something that I was not seeing enough of. And that was why I wanted to put emphasis on.
And it seems like even though these two books that are about to come out that are more of your original books,
yeah,
even though they're more on the friendship, it seems all of them have some type of element of mythical, connective tissues to them.
Definitely, yeah.
And especially Gaelic, right?
Gaelic.
Is it Gaelic? Is it
Gaelic, not Gallic, but yes, Gaelic, as in, like, yeah. Gallic would be a little
The
different.
one time your
What's
French,
Gaelic?
it sounds like garlic. The one time your French accent does not work for you.
Well, I mean, think in France, like, parts of Brittany. The Bretons are connected to the Gaels.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's what I mean.
And so you're like, all those books are really like the fairies. Are you from there? I mean, are you original? Your family from?
Yeah, I have some family who are originally from Ireland, but I kind of stumbled into it because I've been an Anglophile basically since I was a child. An Anglophile, someone who was just really interested in the British culture. But then once I got older and I started paying attention to historical facts and figures, I think that the Irish and the Scottish really just kind of more captured my imagination. The love of music, the sort of inherent humor. I'm still kind of fascinated with anything in the British Isles and Ireland. But I stumbled across this book when I was in college, which I actually have a copy of right here. It's called Irish Fairy and Folk Tales, and it's assembled by none other than W.B. Yeats, as in the poet. And he spent time in 1800s, early 1900s, and went around Ireland and collected these fairy and folk tales. And when I picked it up, I had never really read Irish folk tales before. They are different than, say, the grim fairy tales that we grew up with. And he's the one who talks about this fairy mistress character in here. Don't see a lot of other writing about it else. So I kind of got inspired by reading this book to take that character. And then I was just so still into music and writing about music and interviewing bands.
So you put all together.
Put it all together.
Fantastic.
Exactly.
That's very,
Yeah, that's how that
very
happened.
different. Yeah.
Well, there was in the 1990s a brief period where there was this sort of Celtic rock boom. And at the same time, what's called urban fantasy or contemporary fantasy, where you take these mythical characters, but you put them into a modern context. That was kind of a trend for a while in books. And then it sort of got overdone and it went away. And I didn't manage to publish then. So I'm now coming back on the rebound.
That's right. Leader of the wave now.
Great.
Bring back the fairies is what I say. So maybe we'll get to start the new trend here. So yeah, you follow what you're interested in. And I took a course in college about the art of the storyteller, and we read folk tales from all around the world. And that's another reason I started reading Irish folk tales. It kind of just all the wires crossed at once, and it became something I really wanted to write a story.
What I love about it is that from very young, you have this love of writing. Like for someone in middle school or high school to start writing a book, that is, I mean, it's fantastic.
And to keep it
doing it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
doing your job and as being your job and even your passion now with the publishing those books.
Yeah.
It's to know that from an early age that you know what you want to do, you enjoy it, and you're good at it. That is like fantastic.
Thank you. Thank you. No, I'm lucky. I think there are a lot of people who you grow up and you're like, I don't know what I want to do with my life. I'll figure it out when I go.
So Randee, you bring up an interesting part about how like you started some of these stories when you were younger, but it was a very different iteration. It kind of like lived in your mind, let's say, or maybe on paper, but you kept writing and writing and writing. What was the point that you then said, okay, now I'm ready to bring this to life?
It was a very slow process. I think the thing is that I wasn't necessarily ready with that book, but The Only Song Worth Singing is actually the book that got me the agent. So that's kind of the book that I felt was ready first. And what happened with that was I met a bunch of people who I learned were going to these science fiction fantasy conventions. And we've all heard of San Diego Comic-Con or something like that, which are these enormous ones. But there are lots and lots of small science fiction fantasy conventions all over the country all year long. It's a couple hundred people, it's maybe a couple thousand people, but they are small conventions and they have panels and they have readings and they have all sorts of stuff like that. And they said you should come to one of these and check it out. I'm like, I don't want to wear Spock ears. And they're like, they don't do that. Some people dress up, but it's not all just like a whole room of people wearing Spock ears. Like it's actually discussions about literary matters or your fandoms. And there's a lot of authors. And I met a group called Broad Universe, which is sort of a pun on the idea of broad. It's for female and female identifying and non-binary authors. And it's just a networking group, but they will have a table at a con or they have a reading at a con. And if you're a member of the group, you can sell your books at the table. You can read in front of a group and you get a short reading. So it's kind of like easing myself into the water because I can read for 5 minutes in front of somebody and I would be in a room where all these other people had come for the other broads who were in the room. It was a way to sort of get myself familiarized with what the whole process was, to hear other people give me feedback that I could absorb. I had interviewed a couple of authors one day for a newspaper I was writing for in Boston. These two authors lived in Boston at the time. They're Ellen Kushner and Delia Sherman, who are award-winning fantasy authors. And they're just terrific. They're a couple. They're married now and everything. But when I met them, they weren't married. And when I met them years later, we were on the same train going to a con. We just sat down and talked. And they're like, "Yeah, we'll read your book. Sure, we'll give you feedback."
Nice.
They thought it was great. They were like, "This is really good. We'll blurb your book if you want to." I mean, Delia Sherman's name is now on the cover of The Only Song Worth Singing as one of my blurbers. And they were so supportive, and their prose, again, it was just like little baby steps here and there. And I finally got The Only Song Worth Singing into shape. It got me an agent after a long time. This was not a short process. It wasn't like, oh, I'm going to send it out tomorrow. You get it. This is like a year-long process at least. I got the agent. She said, I'm going to try and get this to publishers. No publishers wanted it at the time. We're talking like 2016. So we just put it away for a while, and I eventually wrote Tune In Tomorrow. And then I talked to another publisher myself, and he said, I'll take a look at that book. So like I kind of gave him the book, and he said, yeah, I'll take that, and I'll take Leave No Trace. So both of those are coming out from this publisher that I connected with. It's just taken a long time to learn the business, and you do it one baby step at a time.
Yeah.
Nothing will drive me crazier than watching a movie or a TV show where like somebody wakes up one day and they're like, I want to write a book. And then like 2 weeks later, they're done. 3 weeks later, they have an agent. And it's out before the end of the year. You know, it's like, this is not how this works. And not only that, they all of a sudden have money from it. It's like, no, that's also not how this works.
They got the pre-signing of it. Yeah,
yeah, exactly.
Randee, you made a comment in there that I loved, that we have kind of like a similar story for as our work besties is reaching out to people that are in your network.
Huh?
Yes. You just never know who's going to say yes. I love that tip to give to people, no matter what kind of industry you're in or what you want to aspire to do. Those small steps, right? Like just going to the con or going to someplace to meet people, joining a networking organization, and then chatting with the people and asking questions like, would you read my book?
If you put yourself out in the world, things will happen. And by joining Broad Universe and then like sitting at a table, because you have to look after the table as well. But I would sit at a table for an hour here or an hour there with other people who had published before. And I could sit there and be like, how did you do it? What tips do you have? It's putting yourself out in the world, and people flinch from the idea of networking. Networking sounds so clinical, as though you have this goal in mind, like, oh, there's an agent I want. She'll be over at this party. I'm just going to beeline over her and talk to her about my book. That's maybe can work for some people, but for the most part, you want to be a friend. You want to be a colleague. You want to be in the milieu so that you can pitch the thing that is important to you, or they can ask you about it too.
We've been saying instead of networking, it's like building your community, right?
There you go.
Your point is more positive to say, I might be making friends with these people or making connections with these people for the sake of having someone else to chat with and learn one or two things from. Like sometimes they lead to bigger and more like bigger things, and sometimes they don't, but regardless,
it's in your community. And the fact that also people really help,
everybody
wants to help.
There's that phrase, the rising tide lifts all boats. And when you have friends who are doing the same thing you're doing and you cheerlead for them and they cheerlead for you, it's like the better they do, the better you're going to do. If nothing else, you can watch how they're doing it.
Right.
Yes.
And try and do something.
This season for Work Besties, I've really focused on wellness. And one of the things that somebody had brought up before was how writing or journaling could be kind of a tactic or way to help with your wellness routine. What do you think about that? Because it's your profession. So
I feel like I write all the time. I mean, I enjoy it. But one thing I have started doing is less of a writing journal than more of a kind of a drawing journal. And what I do is I tend to take it with me when I go on trips as opposed to doing it every day at home. But I have one of those blank notebooks, and I take a page per day and I will write, I'll sort of remember the day through little images that I draw and then a few words here and there. And it sort of helps me imprint the day. It helps me remember things I would probably otherwise have forgotten. Put little tickets and things like there in the middle. There's a woman I know who posts pictures of hers on Facebook, but she does 3 things I'm thankful for. She's a very good, she's a very good artist. And she draws a lot about her cat or what she's eating. She'll do sort of 3 main drawings and then talk about what it is. And I think that's just as valuable as somebody maybe struggles to put down words. You don't have to be a great artist, because I'm certainly not. But I've got some colored pens, and I've got my pen that I can write words with, and I just do a page of drawing. It's very satisfying to then go back and see accomplished.
It's like a memory book. That's really
Yeah, so even if you don't feel like journaling per se.
Because, when I was younger, I tried to do those journaling and putting. Mm-hmm. So when I was angry, I was like,
oh, yeah.
Then I was erasing everything because I'm like, oh my God, you're so mean. I couldn't do it because each time I was going back and changing
You're editing your own
journal. That wasn't the...
The thing about journals, I don't think they're really meant to ever be reviewed. Like, I would
Yeah.
not go back to any of my journals now.
No, if you do go back and read them, like I found one when my parents moved, and I was like, "What was I writing?" Burn this, please.
There used to be an evening event in New York, and I think this kind of was in several cities, but it was called Cringe. And people would pull out their old journals or their letters, and they would read them in front of the room or something.
My God.
Because it was so cringy. But everybody would laugh along with you because you'd be laughing at how silly it sounded, and they would laugh along with you.
Well, sometimes we send each other our Facebook status from like
10 years, 10, 15 years ago. I will say, so we talked about this earlier about passing notes in the hall. I still have a bunch of notes from when I was in middle school and high school. They're hysterical. I can't, like that friends wrote to me and gave to me.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. I would totally go and read them. They're hysterical. Like, even today.
I have mine, too. There was like a whole friends drama in my 10th and 11th grade with this. And then all the little inside jokes are in them and everything. And I kept those because I thought to myself, one day I might write a book using this as drama.
Yes.
I don't know if I ever will, but I have them somewhere. I have them all in order.
That would be so cool.
My parents gave them back to me. Like, they knew I might write about it. So they're like, here, you can have the notes back. So I have like both sides of the notes. And
everything. You do? Oh my God, that's fascinating. I don't have my side. So in some of them, except there are a couple of them, like, remember you'd like pass notes back and forth.
Sure.
You'd write and then the other person would write on top of it and you'd keep going.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it was like the text.
Yeah, it was like text.
Yes. Or like texting, yeah. From the Neanderthal era. You had to use graphite on a paper.
Yes, thank you, everybody. I feel really good about myself right now. One of the things I was hoping we could get incorporate into this is your books are so fascinating and fun. You do focus on the friendship and the fantasy, and there's like elements of wellness in there too. Work besties out there, so definitely read them. For your readers, what do you hope that they take away from these novels? Is it something different from each one? Is it something collectively across all of them?
I think there's a lot of things that anybody can take away from any given book, whether it's mine or anything else.
Yeah.
One of the things that I try to do at some point in most of my books is sort of Trojan horse some big ideas. You may not be to it yet in Tune In Tomorrow, but there is a discussion at one point. It's a silly, funny book, but in the book, you're an actor on the reality show and you win an award. Every time you win an award for being on the show, you get like a little piece of magic that is your own. And it's usually junk magic, like, oh, I can look at this can and tell what the nutritional ingredients are. Like that, very minor stuff. But the first one you get is that your age freezes.
You bring this one up because I was like fascinated. I'm like, oh, I'm in.
Because it wasn't originally reality TV. It was originally like soap operas. I used to write for a soap opera magazine. So this was kind of soap opera-y. And you know that there are actors who have been on soap operas for decades, right?
Yeah.
So I thought, if the Fae are immortal, they would want to have their actors around as long as possible. And a decade or two is nothing.
They're not aging. They wouldn't want them to look old,
You want them to look the same. So your age would freeze. And the thing is that then has a rebound effect on how the humans can interact with the world. I mean, when you leave the show, your age starts all over again. You don't get the accumulated years. You start aging if you leave the show. But while you're on the show, you're the same age as whenever you won that award. And there's a conversation that at least two of the characters have towards the end of the book about the pitfalls of immortality, about the world going on without you while you're on this side of the veil doing the TV show. Your friends get older, your relations die, the world changes. Imagine 1990s to now, right? Like if you started working on Tune In Tomorrow in the 90s and won that award and you left the show in 2025, can you imagine what a whiplash you'd have? Cell phones. I mean, the cell phone is just the tip of the iceberg, but the world has moved so much faster now. We communicate so much differently now.
How confused people would be with you because you would look much younger than you are, and you have no idea what's going on.
Those papers.
I'd be sending.
Yeah, they have a conversation about what it's like what is the real nature of something like immortality. I don't think anybody really wants immortality. They want to have a choice in how long they live and quality of life that they live. At the same time, if you're going to be living a semi-immortal life, one character says to the other, that means that like everything is open to you. You don't have to be in the same relationship the whole time, right? Like you have a buffet to choose from. You can be in multiple relationships. Who wants to be married to the same person for 250 years, right? So there's this. So I'm trying to Trojan horse these kind of discussions.
These after dark.
Yeah, exactly.
We're like, yes, we're in. How do we do this?
That's right. Just got to live a real long time. And the only song worth singing, I'm trying to think of what the Trojan horse conversation is in there. But I think that what we were talking about early on, the importance of friendship and the importance of having a shared common values, background that you are willing to hold on to even when things get super hard. Because I think that friendships that you haven't had that long, people don't necessarily invest in them. The whole concept of ghosting someone, I think, is appalling. The ways we kind of just ball up friendships and throw them away at the toss of a hat. Like, oh, that's, this person did this. I can never talk to them again. How much of a friendship is that? There are friendships that I really want to fight.
So, Randee, thank you so much for your time. This has been so fascinating. We learned so much from you.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was fun. Your stories totally remind us of friendships and unique ways friendships can evolve and ways you can connect with people. And obviously the creativity that you have from all of the kind of fantasy elements of it kind of brings a whole unique layer to it, which is super cool. So whether it's in the pages of your novel or in everyday lives, connections truly do make us stronger. So don't forget to grab Randee's upcoming book, The Only Song Worth Singing, as well as the one that she already has out, Tune In Tomorrow. It's fantastic. And follow her for updates on what's coming next, because as she mentioned, she's got a lot more coming out.
One or so in August.
And don't forget to share this episode with your work besties and subscribe for more heartwarming, inspiring conversation. Thank you, Randee.
Thank you.
Remember, whether you're swapping snacks in the break room, rescuing each other from endless meetings, or just sending that perfectly timed meme, having a work bestie is like having your own personal hype squad.
So keep lifting each other up, laughing through the chaos, and of course, thriving. Until next time, stay positive, stay productive, and don't forget to keep supporting each other.